A huge welcome to BlocksHub, a huge welcome to today's Science Talk. My name is Pernille Berg. I'm Science Manager at BlocksHub, and it is a delight to have you here with us today. How do we ensure a sustainable future? How will our buildings and cities be created and by whom? Which values and materials will characterize the society of today and tomorrow? Those are some of the questions that we are addressing in our current series, Designing the Irresistible Circular Society. We have 8 events. This is our 3rd, and we are delighted that you're with us. For those of you who have been with us before, you have heard me say this. To those of you who have not been with us before, I am really, really happy to see you. And it means the world to us that you join us, take time out to be with us. What we try to do with these events is to mediate and ensure that you have access to some of these amazing people that every day get up to enhance and secure a green transition and a circular economy. A huge thanks to you and also to our partners, Arup, 3XN, Linear Group, the Royal Danish Academy, Danish Design Center, Build in Aalborg University, because without our partners, we could not invite such amazing people. Today's topic, as you have read, From System to Technology, Collaboration for a Circular Built Environment, where we're addressing how we can enable a fair and equitable circular transition at all levels of society in the long term. And I could not have hoped for better people to address those issues than our speakers that we have with me today. I will allow Dr. Patrick Bergmann, Managing Director from Madaster in Germany, and Martin Pauli, Europe Foresight Leader in Arup. They will be with us in a few seconds. But just before I let them take the word, as it were, I have a few practical details. We're live from BlocksHub, situated in the center of Copenhagen. This morning, I woke to a featured article illustrating how cities can transform themselves in less than 100 years, where we are basically inundated with water. They had pictures of Mumbai, they had pictures of Copenhagen, they had pictures of German cities, they had pictures of American cities. And when you watch those images of cities visibly transformed because of the increase in water level, it resonated quite clearly what we are trying to address in the green transition, and what particularly Patrick and Martin are working so hard at securing will not become a catastrophe, but where we will ensure that the planet is still livable for generations after us. BlocksHub was founded in 2018 as an initiative to create space. We focus on collaboration and partnerships between companies, organizations, researchers, and practitioners. We believe in consilience. We believe that together new solutions can emerge, because it is in dialogue and sharing wisdom and insights and experiences that we can create the new solutions that we so desperately need. We think the sustainable transition, the green transition, the New Deal forming around the world, we have it in Europe and we see it in different governments that are addressing the needs for the green transition. We believe that we need researchers and companies and organizations in joint collaborations to make that transition successful. We have you with us virtually. We also have guests with us physically. And it is such a delight that we're now able to launch these hybrid events since the pandemic has eased off a little bit in Denmark. So again, a huge welcome to you. And now, before Patrick and Martin will start, I can only encourage you participating virtually to write your questions. I have a brilliant colleague, Rete, who is your chat hostess today. And you will be able to ask questions, and I will receive them so that I can ask your questions later. And for those of you with us physically, you literally just raise your hand and I'll see you and I'll make sure your questions are mediated to Martin and Patrick. So without further ado, Patrick and Martin, thank you so very, 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 very much for being with us today. I have really looked forward to it. I met some of your colleagues last week in Amsterdam. So I know that you guys know each other well. I also am really impressed by what you're trying to do. So today is an extra kind of icing on the cake, as it were, with the remnants of memories from a trip last week. Martin, I know that you would like to start, so I'm going to let you start. And thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me and us. I would have loved to come to Copenhagen, but at the same time, I also really appreciate those hybrid events. So I hope we can still run smoothly to the presentation. I will take 15 minutes of the time and then Patrick will take over. And ideally, I would also see the screen now. Yeah, excellent. So I don't think I have to explain to a Danish design community what the circular economy is, obviously. What I can tell you from my experience working now almost 10 years in that field and literally only the last 2-3 years it really gained momentum, as you will know. We are still kind of need to find the right arguments in our organization, but also externally towards our clients, that circular economy is adding further value to the whole climate discussion. Because the key question that we are getting asked is, what is the difference to decarbonization? And of course, circular economy has a focus on the materials. We know that a lot of the embodied impact is associated with materials, and I just want to frame that conversation because there has been kind of quite a long discussion and debate on operational carbon and on the energy aspect. And I think we have sorted that out. We will sort that out. But this, what we are seeing here, is means or implies massive challenges for the way we build and design our kind of environment, how we operate it, and how we deal with it at the end of life. Because we have established best practice over the past decades with respect to designing buildings, cities, infrastructure, and a lot of that has to do with these kind of common materials that entail such a lot of embodied impact, and that's what we need to tackle. That is the big challenge that is ahead of us. As you can see, there is scientific evidence that only addressing the material issue and using materials in a circular and more efficient way will help us achieve the climate targets. And what we see is that 2030, it's very likely that we won't meet the climate targets. And that will imply an even bigger pressure on all of us to deliver a circular built environment. And that's why I cannot kind of express enough how urgent that topic is and kind of what challenge there is ahead of us. You mentioned it. There's a whole new regulatory framework emerging around us in Europe, which we really appreciate. There is now a regulatory pressure that, of course, started with the Paris Agreement in 2015. We then had the UN SDGs, and I know you also are dealing with that and have dealt with that. Organizations are adopting that. And now we are kind of talking about the European taxonomy, which defines a common ground for all of us in Europe by defining kind of very tangible technical screening criteria that determine whether a building or an asset or a city district is sustainable and is circular. And that has been, or kind of, that has created quite a huge momentum across the industry and across value chains, which we couldn't believe it would 2 years ago. So just to dive into to the technical screening criteria for circular economy, and I'm not going into detail, of course, but there are some, I would say, positive game changers in there. Of course, there is a story about construction site waste that must be recycled. It's 90%. designers have to prove that they have carried out life cycle analysis. So that is becoming common sense, that you optimize your building, your asset for multiple life cycles, and that you actually calculate the impact along those life cycles. You have to make your building adaptable and flexible, and that's just not a qualitative measure. There's an ISO standard and a European norm reinforcing that, which we believe is absolutely important. 30% of recycled and reused materials. That is probably one of the largest game changers, because that will entirely reshape how supply chains work. Because where do these 30% live? It's in the building structure and in the building facades. And that's why, for instance, steel reinforced concrete structures will need to be, let's say, optimized, and that will have an implication on the supply chain, on, of course, price, on procurement, and so on and so forth. So that's quite a significant criteria, we believe. And of course, there's the digital end that Patrick is going to touch on in a second, where we use digital tools such as BIM or as build models to facilitate that material transparency during the use and also at the end of life. So these are just 5 building blocks. The technical screening criteria contain many more, but we believe they will definitely shape how we all design, build, and operate the built environment. So what motivates us? I mean, it's obvious. Arup is heavily involved in designing, planning the built environment. And what we've seen is, of course, there is a lot of kind of value, and there's a lot of value lost. If we look at the construction, there are construction building materials wasted. There's space wasted. There's kind of office spaces, for instance, are not used. Instead, we are building new. There's energy wasted. And at the end of life, and that's probably one of the most critical aspects, we are wasting valuable resources that are not renewable. And many of those resources still go to landfill, even though national governments claim they have high recycling rates. We all know that in many instances they are more referring to downcycling. So, of course, we know all the principles at Arup. We've tested that. That's a 5-year-old project that a team in London did pretty early in the circular economy conversation. A fully reusable building using secondary parts, and at the end of a very short life cycle, you could kind of cycle back all those technical and organic materials. So what I want to say here is the principles of the circular economy are crystal clear. We can make hundreds of pavilions, but the thing is, now we have reached a point where we really need to scale that up and implement all those principles in, let's say, the day-to-day buildings and assets. We have to make that mainstream, and that's why also we as at Arup have to move away from pavilions. Still, another pavilion that we did with a Dutch and a London team in 2017, which used borrowed materials again to explore what is in theory possible, what kind of supply chains exist, what kind of producers exist that support that, to test that. But as I said, it's really about kind of scaling that up now. We've also tested that in a district in Berlin, a former airport, where we kind of used circular strategies, conduct material assessments, studied already, and that's also, I think, 3-4 years ago, digital material passports, and analyzed all those kind of synergies on that district of water, energy, green infrastructure. So I'm quite optimistic that we will be able to scale that up. And in our experience, it always depends also a bit on kind of how open and how willing the clients are, to what extent they embrace all the principles. And that will, of course, change dramatically now with the taxonomy in place, and we see that asset managers, asset holders, architects are really really open because they have all set themselves decarbonization targets, also at corporate level, but often they struggle to identify the practical means and interventions to achieve those targets. And we believe that the principles of circular economy can actually enable that. What I'm going to show you now is a preview, actually. Arup and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have spent quite some time to come up with a circular design framework. Why have we done this? The principles of the circular economy at the highest level still remain rather abstract for the building and architecture and design community. And that's why we went through an 8-month journey together with EMF to translate those principles into design strategies that are relevant for buildings and the built environment. And that framework has reached a maturity of almost 95%. And if we're lucky, we are going to launch that during COP26 in Glasgow together with the World Green Building Council. And the interesting thing, and that's why I'm telling it, it's going to be an open source database and tool and platform that all designers around the world can use, can adopt, can test to help them optimize their buildings for circularity. Because we still believe it takes some technical effort to rethink rethink the best practice that our designers and architects and engineers have developed over the past 2 decades. Now they need to really rethink that, and that platform can help facilitating that. So it's a fully open source online version, and as discussed, that's just a preview. It's going to be launched in only a couple of weeks. And I'm not going to go into detail, but some of the 4 key principles, and I dare to say that the first one is build nothing. Build for long-term use, build efficiently, and build with the right materials. These are 4 principles that we have identified, and of course then there are sub-strategies and actions below that will help optimizing buildings. And I just want to give you only a few practical examples, if you like, of what we actually mean by those principles and how that could, in principle, also look in reality. So build nothing. Well, we have to increase or we have to use existing capacities better. Across cities in Europe, in the Americas, in China, there are many unused buildings, unused spaces, but still we see that new buildings emerge constantly. And we believe that those existing capacities need to be used in a much better way. And there are business models and new players, intermediates in the value chain, adopting that principle and offering solutions to every stakeholder to facilitate that capacity utilization. For instance, that is a startup in London where you can sell out or rent out your living room as a workshop space. That's just one example. We see university campuses that map their existing spaces using data to optimize the way how they use their spaces instead of building new. Key principle that we believe we have to promote better. And of course, it's a bit strange saying that representing here a global architecture, design, and consulting firm, but I really mean that, and we really mean that. Building for long-term use. I mean, that is probably one of the most essential principles, that we optimize our buildings for flexibility, adaptability, components to disassemble them at the end of life. I think that long-term value that we can design in at the beginning, from the outset, that is one of the key examples. And as we see here, digital technology can help us exploring all those options, optimizing that asset for multiple life cycles. And we also see in national green building standards that this is one key principle that is being promoted and being backed up also with specific KPIs and benchmarks. Build efficiently. It sounds easy, but that is another key item that we have to follow. We need to reduce the amount of materials that we use in buildings. It's that simple. And how do we do that? Well, by rethinking the way we design our systems in a building. What you see here is a very practical example of a life cycle tower in Austria that Arup has co-developed using kind of reducing the thickness of steel reinforced concrete ceilings by using timber beams. And that leads to quite a significant amount of saving resources and thus embodied carbon. And in an ideal world, those systems and components are also optimized either to be reused or to be disassembled at the end of life to be then reused as kind of as parts. Built with the right materials. Yes, we have to increasingly explore new ways of designing our building systems and components. That is an example of a collaboration between Arup and GXN and TNO. I think it's almost 8-9 years ago, and it explores the use of rapidly renewable materials in buildings. What you can see here is a facade element. Of course, there are many other examples where industries are exploring the use of renewable materials because we have to switch those materials from heavy carbon to low carbon, from unhealthy to healthy. And that's, of course, also a creative task that architects and designers will embrace, we believe. What you see on the left-hand side is these 4 blocks that they have a color scheme from dark red to light red. Why do they have it? Because we have enabled a priority of impact. What we want to avoid in the future is that we see buildings on blocks that use recycled doors and they claim to be the first circular building. We need to stop that. We need to be honest about what we are doing. We need to be transparent. We need to be data and evidence based. And that's why we believe following that logic from top to down will enable the community to unfold that impact with respect to decarbonization and value creation that the circular economy will enable. The last slide, and then I'm handing over to Patrick. What we see is, and I think that's also part of the motto, the collaboration is probably the most important thing when it comes to the circular economy, as we are dealing with a systemic issue here. Yeah, so we cannot operate in silos. We cannot operate in very sequenced ways. We need to rethink the way we set up contracts. We deliver projects in an integrated way. And what we see is more and more players that have realized that and that have kind of closed that loop and have kind of integrated in a horizontal way. What you see here is that along every design stage, there are key innovations taking place. Yeah, from modular designs during the design stage, or material passports that Patrick will touch on, or kind of fully new reverse logistics schemes at the end of life. Yeah, so it's all there. All the components are in our hand, but we need to integrate that now. And that integration will need different ways of delivering projects, different contracts, shared pain, shared gain, for instance. And that's kind of one of my key messages here, that we kind of really need to rethink the way we have been designing, building, and operating buildings in the past. And that is equally important as the technical principles. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to Patrick, and I'm also happy to answer any question afterwards.
Thank you very, 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 very much. That was absolutely impressive and inspiring and thoughtful. I'll just let people jot down questions, even if you don't have paper on your phone and whatnot, so that we can address them afterwards. Because that way, Patrick, you will not be inundated with questions, but I can share them, distribute them equally between Martin and you. And thank you very much, Patrick, as well, for being with us. It is such a pleasure to see you today as well. And you will share with us the Madaster, the solution, one of a concrete example of how to address these amazingly complex challenges, as Martin has explicated in his presentation. So thank you very, very much, and I'll let you start.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to tell you a bit more about the idea, the platform that my colleagues in the Netherlands created and that we built now all over Europe. And I just show one slide about the vision because, as Martin said, we all know why we are talking about this topic. But in these 4 pictures, it says quite nicely why are we here, why we have to build a catalogue for materials. We all know the Earth is a closed system, and that makes it necessary to deal with these resources in a good way, in a nice way, and to keep them in the circle, to not wasting them. And as Thomas, one of our founders, always says, waste is material. Waste is material without identity, because this is one of the key points why we just throw them away, because we don't know what is in there. And the solution, therefore, is similar to human beings. How do we get our identity? By a passport. And this is what we want to do with materials. We want to give materials an identity by providing them with a passport. The only question is then who wants to read this passport? Of course, not the architect, maybe not even the first owner of the building, because it's new. The one who really needs to know what is in the building is the second, the third, the fourth owner of the building, because he or she will renovate and or maybe even break it down at a certain time. And this is not working if we print this in paper or we transfer Excel sheets. This is how Madaster emerged. We said we need a global platform, an online register where we can store this data. So we need to know at the beginning what is in the buildings, where is it in the building, how much of is it in the building, maybe even of which quality and how long does it last. But we shouldn't save it in our own cellar. We have to put it in this online register with the ability to also let other people that own the buildings after us, let them know what is in the building. And this is how Madaster, a digital library of material, emerged. And at the moment, we are concentrating a lot on real estate, so buildings in the built environment. However, at the end, if you want to make an overview of all the materials that are in the built environment, we have, of course, to enlarge this also to infrastructure, to highways, to tunnels, to railway systems. And we're working on this in the Netherlands with the first pilot project. But at the end, what is it? It's a platform. It's a register where buildings are stored optimally with a BIM file, so a digital twin that is digitally planned, is uploaded on the platform, digitally or automatically analyzed, and we receive a material passport. So always the same kind of document that says how much steel is in the building, how much concrete, how much wood, even in a second step, how many doors, floors, ceilings. So all these kind of things from materials and or products. And this is something you can then show to your bank or to the future owner. This is quite a large picture that registering something now for reusing in 20, in 50, in 100 years. So therefore, we said we will of course also use a data room object to fill in information that occurs during the lifetime of a building. So if you renovate, if you change something in the building, it has to be stored there as well. And we want to say how much carbon, for example, is within this building. We do have the materials, we do have the quantities, we just multiply it with the CO2 equivalent. And by this, it's an easy and nice way to calculate the embodied carbon. However, we want to go further. We want to say how circular is this entire building. And we always start on a low level, on material, on product level, and aggregate it to an entire building. So we want to know how much of a certain product is already produced with recycled material. And is it a renewable material, or is it just a normal material, a fossil material like concrete or steel? And we want to also tell the owner is the ability to reuse this building or reuse and recycle the materials. So therefore, we created this index that all includes these ideas, also based on a methodology by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, from 0, very bad, to 100, very good. And either you benchmark your own portfolio, or as we do see in the Netherlands, banks already ask for this and say, if we should finance your building, please let us know how circular is your building. Do you have already recycled materials in it? And have you had any thoughts about what happens with the building afterwards? And then fifth, it's the embodied carbon thing is still under development. So we have 4 products, but there's also fifth one already existing. Financial valuation. We say resources are scarce. There's only a certain amount of it, and normally prices rise with scarcity. So for us, it was important to show the value of the material in a building. And therefore, we connected all the materials in a certain building on our platform with stock exchanges. For example, metals are connected to the London Metal Exchange. And by this, we can tell theoretically how much is the material in your building worth it if you would sell it today at the stock exchange. This is, of course, first a theoretical idea, but with this, we also can subtract the construction costs, transport costs, and remanufacturing costs to really get an idea what part of the building can be reused and what is the value of this material. It looks like this. I'm not sure if I told you. Yeah, the upload is via a BIM, a digital twin. It's automatically processed, but you still have the ability with an online viewer to see the building, to adjust, and to maybe connect also materials that were not automatically connected. So therefore, digital planning and digital architecture is necessary, because then we can just use this data, this information during the entire life cycle. We don't have to collect data again and again and again. This is how it looks like. So we made this material passport on a matrix function. You see at the top line different layers of a building, as not the entire building will be reused or renovated at once. So we have a building, the construction that lasts for 50, 400 years, but we have the skin of the building with the facade that maybe change every 20 years, the technical equipment maybe 15 years. And if you think about the interior, especially in office buildings, this is changed every 2-5 years, depending when the tenants change. This is how the circularity indicator looks like. So we have different components, and at the end we show a certain number. In this case, it's 51%, what is pretty good. We do see that most of the buildings designed in a traditional way reach around 10, maybe 15%. If you put in a lot of efforts, if you have the right designers with you, and from the beginning you think the building as a material bank, so you while planning you already know you will dismantle it, you reach around 60. And the best building I know is in the Netherlands, the Triodos Bank, a new building only built by wood, only with screws, I think reaches around 90-95%. So there's this register, and I think I told you most about the advantages that I'll show you now. But it was very important from us from the beginning to have an open system. So with APIs, we can connect with other systems. We can include data from existing databases, but we can also share the data we have on our system with other other platforms. In example, with the LCA platform that calculates a LCA always based on the same structure on Madaster and saves then also the results back on the Madaster platform. So to have also one single source of truth to make sure none of the information is lost. And at the end, we also want to show something to the public, to the politicians. So we are developing a map where you can circle a certain area, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Berlin, whatever. And then Madaster tells you how much of which material is in this building stock, in this area that you marked. So wood, concrete, but maybe even floors and doors and so on. And we also give a estimate what will be on the market the next year, the year after, and in 2024, for example, as we know when the buildings are made, and we have estimates behind every product how long they will last. So to also give an idea to the politicians, say, look, next year there will be 10 tons or 100 tons of concrete in Berlin, in Copenhagen. You have to arrange the politics and the regulations in a way that this material can be reused. There's no political threat to reuse this. But also trade. I'm quite sure there will emerge marketplaces. So marketplaces where secondary materials, secondary products are traded, and we have the information what is in the building. So once a certain owner says, yeah, next year I will deconstruct, we can already use this information, put it to the marketplace and say, please look for someone who might need this door, this floor, or just the concrete steel beam before the first worker comes to the building and destroys it. So by this, we can optimize the process of deconstruction, refurbishment, and rebuild. But also it's interesting to reduce this risk. You all know this dramatic situation in London where they had no clue what is in the facade, and even worse, the facade producer had to admit afterwards, I have 1 billion or 1 million, I think, square meters of this facade sold somewhere else, but I have no idea where. So this we can also reduce the risk by saying we know where the materials are, we know where the products are. One day we find out there's a risk in a certain material or product, we can just open the digital book and see where it has been used. And then, of course, if we think about resource scarcity, producers want to know where their products are because they want to get back their resources. So the idea is that we know the producers of the windows, of the floors, of the facades. And once an owner says, yeah, this is not, the building is not as I want it anymore, I refurbish or I even demolish, the kind of light bulb plops up at the producer and says, there are 100 windows in Berlin that are dismantled. Do you want your resources back? Or maybe they even have to take it back. And then the producer can go there, take this materials, aluminium, wood, whatever, take it home, refurbish it, recycle the material, build new products, and sell them again. This is the story of Madaster, the library for material. And I think it connects very well to what Martin said, that the design process is very important. The digital planning is very important, but we have to make sure that these materials, these products get an identity in order to reuse and recycle them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very, very much. It was really, really, really interesting. And I almost hasten to say that the level of transparency that Martin addressed was needed is what Madaster is striving to ensure.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
And maybe not all companies, not all parts of the value chain do like this, because sometimes they try to avoid this transparency because it's inherent part of their business model.
Yeah, you've almost predicted my next question, because just as Martin and you have now addressed the needs and all what we can actually do, and I think it comes across quite convincingly that we actually have solutions. We know what to do, and there is quite soon an open source tool. My question to you both would be, where do you currently see the greatest challenges to make that transition? I don't know if you want to go first, Martin. You're muted at the moment. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, there are a couple of challenges and barriers. One is if you compare the construction industry to other industries, the productivity remains very low. The level of digitization remains relatively low compared to automotive or whatever. That's why also the profit margins are very low, and the willingness to innovate are very scarce, I would say. The reality is that if a building is constructed, there are contractors, there are subcontractors, subcontractors. So everyone is just trying to avoid risks and not necessarily be willing to implement innovation into a new project. And circular design is about innovation, and that is one aspect, I would say. The other aspect is, and I mentioned that also during the presentation, is kind of the way we deliver projects. If we look at Scandinavia, for instance, we see more and more integrated project delivery models where the investor, the developer, the architect, the contractor, the producer all sit at one table from the outset and carry the project through from 0 to 10. Whereas in more traditional countries like Germany, it's very sequenced. Yeah, there are phases. There's a competition phase, and there's a phase 0, and there's knowledge lost at each, let's say, transition from phase to phase. And if circular principles are not designed in phase 0, it's very unlikely that in phase 3 or 4, or reverse stage 3 or 4, anyone has a real lever to implement circular principles.
So I think
maybe to add there, or to, oh yeah, sorry. To finish this one as well, I do see exactly the same, and it's a cultural thing. I think that's the main challenge, to make the players there aware that they have to work together, that they have to cooperate, and that this big wheel that we try to roll there needs all parties working together, and this starts in the mind of the people.
And do you think, Patrick, that the cultural element, do you think that is embedded within the industry, or do you also observe differences from country to country? Does that make sense, the question?
Both.
Yeah. Because I think it's
Yes.
quite interesting when Martin kind of
I think,
addresses...
as Martin said...
I'll be quiet.
Oh. Okay, yeah, no, I think both is the truth. So I do see that the construction industry in general, or real estate, is lagging behind with other industries. So what is digitalization, and also working together, sharing knowledge, sharing data. And additionally, we do see differences in the country. So the Nordic countries are ahead, Netherlands are ahead. Germany is a large market, so in per se needs a bit more time and more effort to move this old traditional industry and the market. But there are also other countries then lacking behind Germany. So both is true, and that makes it even harder to change.
Do you want to comment, Martin?
Yes, I would agree. I mean, I was also going to say that Netherlands and Scandinavia are kind of the countries that are ahead of the game. But I assume that the European regulation, the taxonomy, the EU Green Deal will harmonize that a bit. And what we are seeing when we are talking to the whole value chain, actually, I mean, our team, for instance, is specialized on consulting the industry and helping them with their transformation from linear to circular. And the industry is very optimistic, I would say. They have all the right solutions in place. They are sometimes complaining about the demand. And on the demand side, I think that is also changing. So I see we will accelerate that transition. We will see that, and that's why I have rather positive feelings around the near future when it comes to circular construction.
And I think part of, you've both addressed this as well, the regulatory system, because I think that the positive aspect, as I mentioned in the opening, the Circular Built Environment Network went to Amsterdam, or some of us went to Amsterdam last week, where we heard that there is the crisis of affordable housing is not just in country, that is more or less across Europe. And I think in Amsterdam alone, it was 200,000 homes needed in terms of affordable housing. So the regulatory, that kind of push in terms of demand to ensure that those buildings are then based on the criteria you mentioned, can make a huge difference. But just to add to that, when you say that each company in this quite complex value chain that is slightly risk averse, not with a huge margin of making quite a nice sum of profit, to make these different organizations collaborate across the value chain. What would your experience from Arup's perspective be? What would your advice be? How can we enhance that scope of collaboration across companies in the value chain?
Good question and super relevant. I mean, a kind of one of the key barriers that I forgot to mention is fragmentation. So the building industry is fully fragmented. A lot of very small SMEs and subcontractors, and every building is still designed as a one-off. Yeah, it's always a prototype. So to facilitate that collaboration, what we see is that more and more new platform-based and industrialized or business models emerge that focus on industrialization of the value chain. Yeah, if you look at the automotive industry, they have a platform architecture, and they can still offer you a fully customized car. But that's based on standardized components, standardized platforms, and we see that more and more players in Germany and across Europe emerge that focus on prefabrication, modularization, offsite construction, fully digital process chains, and those OEMs, how we call them, they facilitate that collaboration. They facilitate the collaboration with tier one and tier two suppliers. They manage the construction supply chain completely different to what we've seen in the past. And I assume that those OEMs will supply buildings at a larger scale in the near future. And that will lead to I would say, consolidation of the industry that we have seen in all other industries in the past decades.
It's very, very interesting transition that the industry itself is going through, not just the so that is, I think that is quite fascinating. Just looking around, do you have any? We have a question in the audience, so we will try and make sure you get a microphone. There you go.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, and if you speak up a little bit, maybe let Patrick and Martin know where you're from.
Okay, hi, I'm Darina from Hungary. And I would like to ask about the Madaster library. I think it's a really cool idea, and I really see how new designs can be uh, easily part of it. But my question is, what about the old buildings? We have a lot of old buildings which we don't really have a lot of documents of or aren't well documented. How can they be part of the system?
That's a very good
Yeah.
question.
Indeed, and I get this more or less every time. So this is also the reason why we treat already this question. I do see three options for that, and we're working on all three. First is we do a kind of estimate. We have a partner where we say, where is it built, the building, in which time, how many cubic meters does it have, and what type of building is it. Then we can give it in a certain column and say, okay, probably these materials, I think there are 15, are in these buildings. It's a guesstimate, so not very detailed, not very sharp, but much more than we already know. Then the pragmatic way is to say, and once we renovate or do something with the building, we add this information. So once a certain floor is changed, we add this information to the digital estimate we have. Once the facade is changed, we add this as well. When the roof is changed, we add this as well. So after 30, 40 years with most of the buildings, you will have the information you need. A bit more complicated, but also a bit more expensive, is to do a digital scan, so to create the digital twin afterwards. There are machines, you put them in rooms or you can fly around the buildings and scan them. However, it takes a while. You need men and women power who walk through the building and check the materials. So I guess this will be for pilot projects or projects where you need very detailed information. I don't see this for the entire building stock. And the last one, maybe a bit more fancy, is with artificial intelligence, where you fill in plans from architects in 2D, where you fill in builds or other descriptions of the building from former times, maybe pictures from the facade or something, and then the computer will generate a digital model of this building with the materials, and this can be uploaded then on a certain library of materials like Madaster. But it is still a large challenge, and I don't have or haven't found the perfect solution yet. And I'm quite sure the company or startup or whoever will do this in a good way will be very rich.
That's a good incentive, I suppose. But I also think it's a really, really good question, because going back to the tool that will be open source in a few weeks, when the first advice or principle is build nothing, we certainly actually need to know that the current buildings, that some of them are quite old, what they contain. I remember a few years ago, Nike covered the materials that they used alone just in their company. They had 85,000 different types of materials they used. And I remember thinking, oh, and they just do sneakers and running gears, so 85,000 pieces of material. And it made me think, when you both presented today, I remembered that number, because that must be so much greater when we talk about city development, infrastructure, and construction. So we need that intelligent solution, as you're advocating, Patrick. It brings me to also what we had as the topic for today in terms of a socially equitable society and the circular transition, and how it can contribute to making sure that it's circularity for as many people as humanly possible. How do you see what you have developed? How is that able to encompass that vision? One thing is the material. We have the biodiversity also coming up. But how do you see that your tools and your platforms contribute to ensuring a socially equitable societal development?
A tricky question. Um, Well, we focus on materials, on closing the loop. And I think at the end, this will lead to a lot of indirect influences on what you mentioned. First of all, maybe lower CO2 emissions. Martin showed it. I think I read something about 60% if we will do. But this opens also regional resource depots. So we don't have to get copper, steel, whatever from other countries where it's maybe sourced in a bad way or under bad conditions. But we have our own resource depots in front of us and are also maybe not that dependent on this value chains anymore. So this might change the whole way of using it, and therefore I also like the English word circular economy, because this implies a certain and a completely new type of economy. And what you say is also true. I think it's not only closing the loop, but also selecting the right materials that should stay in this loop, and also the ones that should be out of this loop. And maybe a reduction of material types and poisoned versions of certain materials is part of this big transition. And therefore, I say big transition because we will not be able to do this in 1 or 2 years.
Thank you. That was a very reflective answer. Martin, do you want to comment or add?
Yeah, I mean, I can try adding to it, but I mean, in the end, what we want to achieve using whatever framework we have is let's say total value, if you like, yeah, that lies in the ecology, and we have discussed how circular economy principles can enable that by protecting the climate, by using renewable resources, renewable materials. Um, we're talking about, of course, also economic benefits. A lot of them have to do with, for instance, Patrick mentioned that new and local supply chains, much more resilient supply chains, new jobs that are dealing with those supply chains that are safer because they are kind of less dependent on price and price volatility and availability. And then, of course, it's the overall social outcome that that has to do with new jobs, with higher affordability, lower prices, and so on and so forth.
I think it's you are both addressing something that is really salient. You mentioned it as well, Martin, that this is also we're also talking about healthy materials, so that it in itself. And I met a person a few weeks ago who also said that circular construction is actually very labor intensive. So we also had a talk about how this could be used in a transition. We have a quite high youth unemployment in Southern Europe. Could this transition to a circular economy also be seen as a positive way in which to ensure jobs or a different type of education for young people? So I think you're both addressing something really interesting. And we actually have a question from the audience.
Hi, thank you both so much. It was such an interesting talk. My name is Katrina. I'm originally Canadian, but been living in Copenhagen for the past 3 years. Martin, I wanted to ask you a really quick question that was kind of built on the build nothing principle that you talked about. First of all, I think it's a foundationally really innovative concept. And I was kind of curious on your thoughts about a conversation that kind of runs parallel to the circular economy is this idea of sustainable growth, or actually maybe pushing that to the concept of degrowth. And within the field of innovation and also within just private industry, how have you found the evolution or the challenges to push an idea that business cannot be exclusively about scalability, or that innovation is not exclusively about an inherent newness or claiming, I don't know, planting your flag on the concept of the first circular building or the first circular concept in a certain field is something that I'm having a lot of challenges in my own professional life. So I'd love to either commiserate or hear your wisdom about it.
Good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's challenging to find an answer. But I mean, if I look at one of the key aims of the circular economy is to decouple economic growth from resource consumption. So if we take that theory, then we can still allow for a sustainable growth that creates value not for a few but for the many. I think that is where the economic system needs to be also kind of rethought and to some extent reinvented. I think that's one thing, and that's easier said than done. But if we would achieve that, we could still kind of create that value, create wealth for everyone, but we would be less dependent from the resources that are not renewable. And if I'm or we are saying that to build nothing, of course that goes into that direction. But the thing is, that's also from a European bubble perspective, yeah? Because in our context, 95% of all buildings are built. New buildings will emerge in China and India. That's where kind of new middle class people will emerge. That's where the world population is growing. And that's where we need to facilitate those discussions. And of course, I don't want to state that India or China or whatever country should stop building houses. However, they should build houses in a, let's say, consistent way that is not harming the environment. And that is the challenge that is ahead of us. And I'm not sure if I was able to answer your question.
It was a nice attempt, I would say. I think
We'll
it made a
try
lot of
it.
sense. It was good. It was good. Patrick, you may have also thought of something here at the end to answer that question.
I think nothing much to add to Martin. Yeah, I think the key is that by closing the loop, by using things, materials in a circular way, we can still produce stuff without harming the environment and thus harming the globe and all people living on it. So that also changes a bit from the normal concept of sustainability, which is much more on efficiency. But the cradle to cradle topic also takes this into account, saying we shouldn't make things more efficient that are wrong from the beginning on. So just do it in the right way instead of doing the wrong things better. And this is also connected to circular economy, that we have totally new possibilities in this concept.
And I think that was a very, very beautiful note to finish it on. We will not do the wrong things better. We will find the right things to do the right way for the right reasons.
Exactly.
The time flew, but listen, guys, this was an amazing science talks because of you two, also because of the people here with us. But this has been such a delight and true inspiration to be with you this afternoon. I'd like to thank you, and I want to give you a sound that you may not have heard for a while. This is the sound of a room clapping to share with you our appreciation. So thank you so very, very much. It's one of the nice features of being able to be together physically. But thank you so very, very much for your participation and your willingness to share your profound insights and visions and experiences with us today. It was a real pleasure. Thank you. And
Thanks
thank
for
you
having
to
us.
you who were here with us. It was a delight to have you with us here today. I wish you all a very good afternoon and evening.